I will try and introduce apologies for those who are already familiar with the Mbambenzele, but I will just introduce the Mbambenzele to everybody just so that we understand who they are, and also because I'll be speaking about them next week as well, so it's quite good to have a little bit of a basis of an understanding of who these people are. I'm going to then briefly touch upon some of the theoretical ideas which this paper or presentation is about. And it's really about the role of menstruation as the anchor par excellence for human culture to hook itself on in order to assure that it gets passed down the generations in a remarkably effective way. And indeed, as Chris has mentioned, it really was quite astonishing the extent to which the Mbambenzele, in their cosmological practice or ideas and their ekila taboo practices that I'll be talking about today, do provide an extraordinarily insightful example for helping us to think about what human menstrual taboos have done for humanity, and it really is rather remarkable what they have done. But anyway, I'll first introduce the Mbambenzele so you understand a little bit about who they are and where they live. And this spirit here is called Ejengi, and he's actually central to the story that we'll be hearing later. So these are groups of people. We don't really know how many exactly there are, but anywhere between about 350 to 900,000 people. So they're probably the largest group of hunter-gatherers and former hunter-gatherers in the world today, even though they're dispersed over an area that's about two-thirds the size of Western Europe. There are extraordinary cultural continuities between these groups, and the language families that they speak are very, very diverse and different. And this, I think, actually adds weight to the appreciation of the role that things like ekila, this taboo structure I'm going to be talking about tonight, have influenced human societies so effectively that even though these different groups speak different languages today, they share, all of them, this taboo complex that, at least in the central region, the Mbambenzele area, this is where I've been, here we are. This is where I've been working, and they use the word ekila. All these groups around here use the word ekila, and when you get over onto this side here, they talk about ekeri. And those of you who know about slippage in language, R and L is a classic one to slip. And so it's effectively the same word. And genetically, we know that these groups here haven't been in contact with these groups here for around 25,000 years. So this is a sort of an archetypal complex, symbolic complex, which is extremely central to understanding human society. So what I want to try and explain today is how this symbolic system, to have such duration, it had to avoid being transmitted by individuals, because individual transmission is extremely vulnerable to change. The person who's responsible for transmitting that piece of cultural knowledge can suddenly decide on a whim that they think it should be expressed differently and express it differently. And then, of course, the thing changes. But what's very interesting about these particular systems is that they are never transmitted on an individual basis. Instead, they're transmitted collectively. And that collective transmission ensures that it's not really easy or possible for anybody to suddenly turn them over and completely reinterpret them. They have a longevity which is ensured by this collective, distributed way of passing them down. And I want to try and evoke some of that, the way that ekila practices this taboo complex is experienced as your body grows. And this is something that someone called Sandy Robertson made very clear. Culture is not something that's clear-cut, that is shared by all of us. So, for instance, for those of you who claim to be British in this room, how many of you know the full range of recipes that we might call British food or British cooking? Very unlikely. Even fish and chips can be cooked in such a wide variety of ways that I recently found the local chip shop near me has been designated one of the top 10 chip shops in Britain. And you would think it's fairly simple to fry fish and chips, but obviously not. And or if you think of language, of course, my knowledge of the English language is limited to the particular interests that I've followed over my life, and it's quite different to the knowledge of English language that a medic over at UCH might have, or an engineer. Each language is composed of such a wide range of different specialized vocabularies that it's not really possible, and maybe there is someone who knows the whole of the English language, but I'd be very suspicious of that claim. So what's interesting about Aquila is that it's full of counterintuitive, striking and odd relationships that are posited. So, for instance, if a pregnant woman eats a blue duiker, which is a very small type of antelope, she'll have a difficult childbirth. That's one of the Aquila beliefs. It's Aquila to burn ticks on a fire. If you do, and any food is cooked on the fire, people who eat that food will become mad. They will lose their minds. If my wife sleeps around, my Aquila, manifested as my hunting success, will be ruined. If I sleep around, my wife will have difficulty in childbirth. How are all these things connected together as Aquila? They're all referred to as Aquila. And although I'm using different words, very often if you were speaking to Mbengele, they'll just talk about your Aquila's ruined, meaning my hunting is ruined. But because I'm a hunter, I know that that's what's being referred to. But this word Aquila is used polysemically across a whole range of different domains to mean quite different things if we think about these things literally. So as I was hearing in fieldwork these range of different ideas, practices, associations that people referred to generically as Aquila, I became more and more puzzled. And it really literally took me about 5 years to figure out what on earth connected these things. And actually it was that curiosity that these beliefs or claims caused me to experience that suddenly provided me with the analytic insight that I needed in order to figure it out. Because once I realized some connections, they made me reappraise other connections. And the system, in its sort of weird, puzzling way, connects different sections of cosmology together in what appears at first to be unclear, but then as you grow over time, you start to realize how it helps you to understand better the way that society and cosmology are organized together. And so Sandy Robinson, who was particularly good at describing the ontogenetic nature of culture, the way that culture is an experience that changes with age. You are more available to different aspects of culture as you move through life. And even the same aspect of culture, it may hit you in one way at a certain point in your life, and then as you grow older, it hits you in another way. Take, for example, the concept father. As an infant, you have one particular engagement with your father, and the figure of father has a particular meaning to you. As you become an adolescent, of course, that perception of father starts to change. And then perhaps as you start to have interests in reproduction yourself, then the concept of father again takes on a new meaning. And as your child grows and you observe the changes in them and how that relates to you and your relationship to that child, your understanding of the idea of father shifts again. And of course, as you become a grandfather and so on. So the way that we understand cultural concepts, key cultural concepts, is not something that's rigid or fixed, but it's something that is constantly evolving in interaction with your experience of that concept as you move through life. And so in a sense, culture is ever-changing. It's not something that's static and fixed, but it's something that moves with us as we move along. And I found that this understanding that Sandy Robertson expresses so clearly was very helpful for understanding why Aquila has or works in the way it does, and why it does the social cultural work that it does for human societies. What it does, in a sense, is by creating these complex interacting relationships that are difficult to figure out, your curiosity is stimulated, and as you move through life and those puzzles return to you, you start to understand explanations and cosmologies, ideologies about the way things work, like, say, folk biology, how children are procreated in different ways because your own life situation is shifting. And this allows people to experience their cosmology as a sort of process of self-discovery. It's not something that's imposed on you by an authority out there, but it's hinted at, it's teased, it's tickled out of you in your own reflections on life and on the things that you do, as curious human beings do all over the world and have done through all time. So really what I'm interested in trying to present Aquila to you is how really complex cultural categories are passed down without recourse to authority figures, without recourse to authoritative institutions that determine what should be the cultural dogma, but through ways which actually, by avoiding those very institutions, by avoiding those very individuals, seem to have much, much greater continuity and solidity over time than cultural conceptions and ideas that pass through these very hierarchical institutions. Now, why this is particularly astonishing is that there have been a number of anthropologists who've questioned whether hunter-gatherer societies of the type that I'm talking about, the Bambengele, have a sort of a culture at all, because they don't have individuals who can judge, who can say, this innovation isn't Bambengele, stop doing it, who can determine what the boundaries of our culture are. They don't have those kinds of individuals. In fact, it would be completely unacceptable for anyone to even claim that. And so people like Ron Brunton, an anthropologist, made a very sort of polemical argument that in such as societies, they're just random assemblages of what people do. There's no continuity over the long term. They just happen to be existing now, but as soon as a shock or something happens to them, poof, they'll disappear, and then those people will go off and do something else. So that, in a sense, egalitarian societies are just haphazard assemblages of practices that might appear to outsiders as being egalitarian, but there's no real coherence or sense to them. But then, how can we explain the distribution of Aquila across these groups that haven't been in contact for centuries, and in some cases millennia? How can we account for that long-term cultural continuity? And indeed, we find these very similar taboos around the division of blood, and blood is at the heart of these taboo structures. Menstrual blood on one side, the blood of killing animals on the other. And these taboos around keeping these different bloods apart are common throughout the world, and pretty much all hunting cultures will, to some extent or other, have taboos like this. So, for instance, one of the most common taboos is that menstruating women will make the poison of poisoned arrows or poisoned spears go off and perhaps not work. That dangerous animals will smell the smell of menstruation, and they will attack whatever it is that smells like that. These are remarkably common taboos across the San Bushmen, the Hadza in East Africa, all these different pygmy groups, and indeed the Australian Aborigines and many other groups of hunters. And they have their vestiges still in today's society. So, for instance, up until very recently, up until actually supermarket chains and their management practices, you would very, very rarely, if ever, find a woman butcher. And even today, abattoirs are places where you rarely find women as active workers. These separations still remain. The sacred blood of Christ cannot be touched by a menstruating woman. in the Catholic Church. So you would not go for communion if you are menstruating. Indeed, you shouldn't really even go to church while you are in your period if you're a woman. So these taboos remain, they still have their echoes up even in heavily industrialized societies, but in many other places they're still very, very strong. And these bloody connections are mediated by taboos that always use striking symbolism of menstrual blood, animals' blood, the moon, and they link childbirth and hunting as core gendered activities of humans, of people. They make the sexual division of labour seem natural and logical by defining men and women as different but equal, as autonomous but interdependent, as in tension yet also harmonious. And such taboo complexes have been doing this for human groups for a very long time. But how? I'm going to first introduce a little bit more about the Mbengele context so that you can see the way that this taboo works. So people, up until actually just about a decade ago, were very, very nomadic in the forest, and things have changed. I'll talk a little bit about this towards the end. But generally in camps of between 10 and 60 people are moving very fluidly through a very large area of forest. The movements can be seasonal, but they can also be social. You want to go and see your friend or your brother that you haven't seen for a while, just as much as you might want to go and visit that particular group of fruiting trees because you know that they're going to be in season, or that particular river to go fishing, or whatever it might be. People also move to avoid one another. In these societies where you don't have a judge, you don't have a police force to impose norms, if someone really does annoy you, if someone really tries to impose themselves on you or assert themselves over you, you don't even need to bother arguing about it. You can just leave. And indeed, a divorce in these among the Mbengele is very simple. You just walk out. You don't even need to explain yourself. Your husband or your wife has no right to demand an explanation. It's your absolute right to walk off. And they don't have words for goodbye, for instance, because goodbye implies some sort of claim to the person returning again. And that's not on. Each person should really be respected for their mobility and their freedom of movement. You might notice in this photograph, hopefully, that actually the space in the camp is quite gendered. So you have women who will tend to hang around on the outside, just outside their hut entrance, and men will tend to sit in what's called the mbanjo, in the middle of camp. And here you can see they're sitting by the fire where there's a bit of meat smoking because we want to go and perform a big ritual in a few days' time, and so we need a bit of food to supply everybody during that time. But actually it's quite unusual to store food, and people will only store food because there's more than you can initially consume right there and then. So James Woodburn, who has really characterized the distinctiveness of these egalitarian societies the most precisely, he calls them immediate return societies. So people go out on that day and they hunt and they gather food and they collect these things together and then they consume them immediately. They share them all out right there on the site. I've often been honey collecting, and perhaps we haven't got much honey and we just eat the lot right there and then, and we walk back to camp with nothing, and people say, "Did you find any honey?" You say, "Oh no, we didn't see any honey." And women will very often do this. They go off collecting yams or fishing, and they will just eat everything they find just there and then. It's only if there is abundance that you will bring things back to camp and share them with other people. So this, the division between men and women spatially that you can see here is reflected in the work roles that men and women do, and also in cosmology, ritual, and in many other areas. But first, just for those who aren't familiar with egalitarian societies, I'll briefly go through the key areas. So equality is achieved through direct individual access to resources. No one can claim to prevent you from accessing something you need for your life. If you want to go and hunt or gather, you are free to do so. There is among them Mbengele, among Batek and Agta, for instance, in the Philippines and Malaysia, women will hunt using blowpipes. In Africa, women don't like to hunt with weapons that pierce animals and cause blood to flow. That is what men do. When women hunt, they will catch an animal and they will try and knock it out or otherwise bludgeon it so that it doesn't bleed. And they don't want to pierce the animal in killing it. But everyone has access to the means of coercion. So poisoned arrows will be widely available for anyone to pick up. And so even if you're very slight and small, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be respected, because you can just as easily pick up that poisoned arrow and go and stab somebody with it. And strength doesn't necessarily mean that you should dominate. So the access to the means of coercion is important. And then mobility. There's nobody who can stop you from going where you like. And I've already mentioned the lack of a word for goodbye. In order to prevent any individual accumulating more than others, being able to manipulate or otherwise deprive others of basic needs, and so assert power over them, they have procedures that impose sharing. So these aren't societies where you share in the way that we do in Britain. So if I have a big bag of sweets and I offer some to you and I offer some to you, but I don't offer you any, well, suddenly actually I'm favouring you and I'm not favouring you. So now I start to ask you to do things for me in order to get access to my sweets. Well, that's a very British way of sharing, and it's actually making me feel good and try and manipulate a situation for power. Whereas in these situations, if I have a bag of sweets, you simply say, give me sweets. And it's my duty, it's my obligation to give you sweets. So I hand my packet of sweets. You just put your hand in, you grab a load. You see that she's got a load of sweets, you say, give me sweets. And of course she opens her hands and you take sweets, and you step over back, give me sweets. And you're already asking me for sweets and I'm passing them over. In the meantime, I'm trying to get a few in my mouth. And before you know it, the sweets have just gone around this room in a very rapid and uncontrollable way. And it's that rapidity and that demand-sharing ethos that ensures that no individual can really manipulate distribution or the accumulation of material goods that people need to their advantage. And without dependency, which is crucial. And then there are these levelling mechanisms, and those of you who came to hear Dasha's talk a couple of weeks ago will have heard her talking about ridicule and the way that women in particular use ridicule as a very powerful levelling mechanism to put men in their place if they try and assert, say, physical dominance through violence, or try and just treat a woman badly for various reasons, or not share properly, or whatever it might be. And these are very important processes by which people will ensure that those who do seek to rise above or claim higher status than others are quickly put down. And there's an awful lot of very rude mockery. My wife has just been, she's in Congo right now, and she's just been down to the camp where we normally hang around, and she's seen a very good friend of mine called Fata, whose name means money. And he's a very old man now. He's a very famous elephant hunter in his youth. And sadly, he has been completely alcoholized and is a really, and I'm sure right now as we speak, he is enjoying, because my wife gave him a bit of money because he asked her, and he's enjoying a good old drink. So just in memory of Fata. When I was there about 3 or 4 years ago, there were some people who had camped on the other side of the river, some farmers, and when they heard about this white man who'd arrived in the Benjeli camp, they were very curious to come and see. So this Bantu farmer arrived in the pygmy camp, and as soon as he popped his head over the hillock by the river, Fata saw him. And immediately, he's a very skillful hunter, he went up to him, grabbed him under the arm and said, I'm the big chief of this whole camp, look at me, I'm the man who's in charge of everybody here. If anybody says anything to you, you just come to me and I'll sort it out. I'm the big cheese here. And he carried on with this banter, and the Bantu was sort of surprised, but in Bantu society, if you meet the chief, you have to show respect. And how do you show respect? How do you... No, you buy him a drink. So Fata was on the case because there was a Bantu woman who'd set up a little lean-to with a big bottle of alcohol and was selling it. and Fatah was determined that this man was going to buy him some alcohol. There were 3 small children sitting playing in the dirt, and they can't have been older than about 8 or 9. And as Fatah dragged this sort of rather unsure Bantu along with him, shouting all this stuff, one of the little boys said, in Lingala, choosing the language so he knew the man would understand, the visitor, "He's not a chief, he's a tosser!" And Fatah just behaved as if he hadn't even heard it. And just, "Yeah, I'm the big chief here, you have any problems with anybody, you come to me." And I could see on the face of this Bantu guy, he just, there was a dissonance. He couldn't understand how could small children speak to this important old man in this way, because Fatah's charisma had already started to persuade him. And of course he went on to buy Fatah a drink. But it's that sort of just the way those small kids ridiculed Fatah so publicly and loudly is just classic of the really aggressive and strong way that anybody in that society will immediately start to undermine someone who tries to claim special status or authority. So while this immediate return system, and I invite you all to read James Woodburn if you haven't, very great paper there, is opposed by delayed return societies. Now we of course are a delayed return society. I invest my labour giving seminars, lecturing, writing articles and so on over time, and in return I get my wages at the end of each month, and that keeps me going. Farmers, for instance, will clear a field, plant the seed and weed it, and then organise labour for the harvest, and it's through that process that they will assure their livelihoods. These are delayed return systems. You invest your labour over time before you receive a return. And that immediately throws open the opportunity for individuals or groups within those societies to assert authority. When you have the field, you've got to, on the one hand, whoever has claim to that field depends on people to come and work for them in order to get the product of that field into their grain stores or wherever they keep them. But those people who work on the field also depend on that person to redistribute some of that grain to maintain them through the year. And those dependencies immediately make participants vulnerable to exploitation, to manipulation, and to the ability of those with authority to make demands on them that they might otherwise not accept. And although immediate return societies such as those of the Mbengele are very rare today, they represent the greatest diversity in human societies that we have. The distinction between immediate return and delayed returns is so radical that all the Bayaka groups, so the larger regional groupings of Pygmy peoples, speak languages that are identical to their neighbours, but they don't ever claim to have a shared culture with those neighbours. They always maintain that they are forest people and those other people are guerrillas. And the reason they're guerrillas is because they're obsessed with private property. And guerrillas and farmers are extremely aggressive and violent about their ideology, this, for the Mbengele, unacceptable ideology of private property. How on earth can you claim that something that exists can be yours? Komba, the creator, made the whole of the world for all creatures to share, and that little antelope has just as much right to those resources as you, the grown-up, the human being, or the gorilla has to those resources. And it's unacceptable that anybody should claim that that belongs to me. And as you may remember, those who've read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he makes a very similar claim. It's almost like he'd spoken to the Mbengele. The first man who thought to delimitate a piece of land and claim it as his own and found people foolish enough to agree with him was the real inventor of civil society. I mean, I'm misquoting, but it goes something like that. And it really is a very similar thing. So there are no leadership roles, of course, in egalitarian societies, whereas in these delayed return societies, we have leadership roles all over the place. And those leadership roles, of course, give individuals great authority and power over others. Now, the gorillas, of course, reflect very much the hierarchies that are present in farmer societies. You have these dominant males who can become very aggressive. In Benjele, who walks across the farm of a farmer, and just walking, doing nothing, suddenly encounters the farmer. "Ah, you thief, I'm going to beat you, what are you doing on my farm?" And all these accusations start following, and it can end up being big problems. And it's the same when you're walking in the forest. You're just in the forest, everybody's forest, and then you tread on a stick, and there's this crazed gorilla comes charging out at you, and literally you shit your pants. It's just so frightening, the roar that they provide. And so Benjele, when they talk about the farmers, will just as often use the word ibobo, which is gorilla, as they're likely to use bilo, which is the formal, polite name for farmers. The farmers try and call them Benjele chimpanzees as a way of getting back at them, but they don't realize that actually that's not an insult to Benjele. It's just a descriptive. And actually, when you look at chimpanzees, they love a party. They do these sort of what are called carnival displays. They have these beating buttress roots and screeching and hollering. And the Benjele love to party too, whereas gorillas are sort of a bit more sedate and hang around in their little groups with the big boys staring around. And so where the Benjele don't have leaders, they don't have private property, they share everything on demand. The Bilo, the delayed return people, they have leaders, they don't share on demand, they do transactions, reciprocity, it's all about reciprocity, constantly obsessed with how much has been given here, how much has been given there, how much was received, how much was taken. And they invest in these delayed return activities. They work hard over long periods before they get anything back. Even in their ritual, the Benjele laugh at their rituals. They sacrifice a chicken and they pour the blood onto the tomb of an ancestor, and they say, in this season will be a really good harvest. The ancestors are blessing our harvest. Or you will now be a fertile woman. The ancestors are blessing your fertility, or whatever it might be. But it's always something promised in the future. Whereas when the Benjele do their rituals, it's a great big party. And what they consider to be the work of ritual is to produce joy, to produce an effervescence of communitas. And it's that joy which is the direct result of ritual work and ritual action. It's immediate. You feel it there and then. It's not something you have to wait for 6 months down the road. The Benjele have a simple way of distinguishing as well between delayed and immediate return. They talk about people with hard hands and people with easy hands. People with hard hands are people like us who walk past beggars without giving them money, who will keep things hidden so that we can hold on to them for longer. Whereas people with easy hands are like the Benjele. My dear friend Mongimba, who Ingrid just saw today as well, he fell out of a tree 25 years ago. He's paraplegic. He just, because he's never had any doctor's involvement, has somehow managed to keep moving. And whenever I go and see him, I always give him lots of old T-shirts and things because he's constantly wearing rags. And then when I see him a few days later, invariably he's back in his rags, and I say, Mongimba, why haven't you kept just one of those T-shirts for yourself? And he says, well, what can I do? The kids come to me and they say, give me the T-shirt. And if you love people properly, you can't refuse them, can you? And so I start again and I give him some more T-shirts. But egalitarianism is something that's imposed on you. People are constantly making demands for things. It's not something that is just this nice people, everyone's being kind to each other. Of course, people are kind to one another as well. But crucially, it depends on these rather raucous, sometimes aggressive demands that people are constantly making for the things that you have that you're not immediately using. So it's important to understand that egalitarianism is imposed on you by those around you. In one of his papers, James Woodburn likens it to taxation, this demand sharing. We earn a wage, and society has just determined that a certain percentage of that will be taken and used for people for other reasons, for more central things. And we accept that, and demand sharing, in a sense, is a bit like that. So there's a basic division of labour between men and women. Women will collect wild tubers, vegetables, fruit, insects, certain types of honey that grow on the ground. Men, by contrast, will hunt large animals, including elephants. They will also collect honey, which often requires climbing for and is very dangerous. And very occasionally people keep farms, but they tend to do it very poorly, and it's a rather haphazard affair. There's a big disincentive in such a society from engaging in something like farming, because as soon as your crops are ready, all your friends and relatives descend on you and just start demanding it. So all that labour, you just did for everybody else, and so people quickly get fed up. Funny enough, Mongimba, the cripple, his brother, from time to time will come and visit him and will dig him a manioc farm, will work for a week or two clearing an area of forest and planting manioc, and then leave. And Mongimba, of course, is then in a predicament, and he's found a solution, a very clever solution. What he does is, when his manioc harvest is just approaching ripeness, he hires local Bantu farmers to come and collect the manioc for him, and he sells it to them. So instead of keeping the manioc, which everybody can see and demand from him, he can hide the money under his mattress and use it bit by bit as he needs it. So of course people try and find solutions, but it does mean that things aren't always simple. So this picture, just to emphasize how sharing is done here, is an example. So Makongo has just been and he's killed a large pig. Now, you probably can't see, but anyway, Mbatiti over here has just butchered the pig. So as soon as Makongo came into camp, all the kids shouted, "Wah, wah, wah!" And then everyone knew meat has come into camp. And they took the pig from him. Mbatiti then took the pig, cut it up, and this old man here, who knows everyone in the camp very well, is now saying this piece should go to that household, this piece should go to that household, and he's choosing the soft pieces for the old ladies whose teeth are falling out. He's choosing the larger bits for the larger families and so on, and he's trying to make sure that everybody will get a fair share of meat. And Makongo wants his Aquila to be intact so that his hunting is successful. So he is observing carefully that the meat is distributed properly, because if anybody starts to feel that they haven't received a fair share, that will ruin his Aquila, that will ruin his hunting in future. And you can see behind that these ladies are waiting, and these kids are actually there to take the meat once it's been distributed around to other people. And so even people, invalids, like Mongimba, if he's present, he will always get a share. Anybody who is present has an equal right to a share, and it's not a question of your prior contributions. There's no issue of reciprocity here. And if you just think about the idea of tolerated theft, which has been presented as one of the explanations for hunter-gatherer sharing, it just doesn't make sense. Why on earth, if this was tolerated theft, would Makongo carry this 60, 70 kgs of meat for several hours to bring it back to camp? If it was tolerated theft, he'd just eat the liver and some of the soft organs quickly on the spot and then fill his belly, and like when we don't get much honey, he would just leave it there to rot. Why should he bother the really hard work that involves of carrying it home? Women will share differently to men. So because women will have these more reliable, abundant resources like yams, when they have more than they initially can consume, they bring it back to camp and they cook it in large cauldrons as big as is needed, and then they send plates out, or leaves very often, to different households and to the men's and banjo in the middle of camp, and so do their sharing in that way. And of course there are people who steal, who hide things, who don't want to share them, who try and escape from these demands. But there are always very vigilant individuals like this old lady who is remarkably grumpy and so quick to spot anybody who might be keeping something for themselves. She's actually a nightmare to have in camp because she just causes so much trouble. But there are lots of these vigilant individuals who are keeping an eye on what's going on and and making a fuss when it doesn't go in the way that it should do. And if you're caught out like this, you are mercilessly teased. And if you persist in trying to hide things, people will start to curse you. One man, he was cursed to meet gorillas when he went into the forest, which is terrifying when these huge animals charge you. Sometimes people will just avoid you, so you'll find yourself one morning all alone in camp. There's nobody else. They've got so fed up with you that they've gone. Sometimes it leads to actual violence, and I have seen big fights erupt around a lack of sharing, with sometimes 5 to 10 people just in a big messy melee as they bash each other very seriously. The gender relations in these societies are organized so that each gender is independent of the other. So women can collect protein, they get meat, insects, they can collect them easily, and then they have their various leaves and starch, wild yams. So in effect they are nutritionally or economically autonomous from men. And of course all the tools that people use for their everyday life are widely known. People know how to construct and build all the various things that they need in order to get their food. And this lack of dependency is enshrined in the creation myth that I'll shortly tell you. Men, of course, are hunting large mammals. They're also fishing, and they're collecting wild yams and leaves and fruit and so on. So each gender doesn't actually require the other. Political independence. Women don't depend on men. In fact, if men try and suggest something that women don't want to do, they simply don't do it. And I've been in a number of camps where women have refused what the men have suggested. And the men are all standing up saying, right, we're off now, yes, let's go. And the women are all just sitting there going, oh, are we? Oh, very nice, off you go then. And eventually the men just have to put their stuff down and say, hey, what's going on, ladies? You know, why aren't we going? And then, of course, the real issues start to emerge. But women will use their solidarity. Women have a very strong sense of solidarity, and Ekila, menstruation, is part of that, and I'll get to it in a minute. And they use this solidarity to assert political pressure on men, to resist men who try and manipulate them. In situations of domestic violence, for instance, a man who is drunk and starts beating his wife will quickly incur the wrath of all her friends and sisters, and they will start to beat him most aggressively. And the sort of highest level of fighting among Benjele, they're actually, although they do fight, they're very controlled, they have levels of fighting, is fighting with greenwood, so freshly cut young saplings, big staves basically. And if men fight like that, it's, you know, people said it will probably, someone will die because the strength of the blows will crack someone's skull. But the only time I've ever seen people fighting with it is when men start beating women, and then the women are very quick to pick up these staves and start bashing men hard. And it really is impressive how quickly pain can calm down a crazed male. But widows, as we heard from Dasha the other week, have a very special role as the most important teasers, if you like, or mockers of those who break social norms. And so someone who doesn't share or who doesn't pull their weight in whatever way could become subject to elderly ladies imitating what they have done in such a way that without naming them, everybody starts to recognize who's being mocked, whose behavior is being ridiculed. And they won't stop until the person who's being ridiculed laughs. And this, of course, is a very powerful mechanism for changing people's behaviors. Of course, many people just run away because it's too embarrassing or they're too angry still. But other people will also use ridicule. It's used quite widely. But in situations of extreme conflict or very stressful moments, it is the older ladies who are the ones who have to do this, because they are the most skillful at managing to maintain the humour at the same time as that trenchant, cutting critique that gets to the bone of whoever's being teased. So these, although I've been emphasizing difference, these are among the most egalitarian gender relations that exist on Earth, far more egalitarian than what we have, for instance, in Europe or in Britain. in Britain, we live in a meritocracy. So we're all supposed to start with equal opportunities, and then through our individual merit, we go higher or lower than others. But if you happen to be female, you're much less likely to achieve the same level of merit as a male. If you come from the south of Britain, you're more likely to achieve merit than someone from the north of Britain. And if you're a person of colour, you're even less likely to achieve those positions of merit than others. So the ideology of meritocracy is actually an ideology which masks profound inequalities and is designed to do so, actually. In this society, people recognise their differences. They don't just recognise them, they celebrate them. And they celebrate them because they are not valuing one as higher or better or more important or more valuable than the other. They are equally necessary for human societies to live well and to persist into the future. So the men and women have this creation myth that really underpins this division of labour. In the very beginning, men and women were created separately without knowing about each other. Komba, the creator, put men in one part of the forest and women in the other part of the forest, and he didn't tell them about each other. He just let them carry on. And the men hunted elephants and pigs and other things and honey, and the women fished and dug wild yams and collected leaves, and they danced Ijengi, that spirit I showed you at the beginning. And if they needed more children, Ijengi produced more children. And so they lived without knowing about each other. Now, the next part of the myth is contested. Women have their version, where they are the protagonists who sort out and create society, and men have their version, where it's a man who does the work of creating society. So as a man, I'm going to tell you the men's version, but actually the women's version is more fun and a lot more raunchy and has all sorts of very dirty songs that go along with it. But just for the sake of brevity. So Tolly, this man, and in the women's version, Tolly is a woman, of course. Tolly decides one morning he wants to go and hunt elephants all by himself. So off he goes, and he just leaves the other men. They're going off to collect honey, and he's walking through the forest, and he's cutting across the tops of rivers. When you want to walk quickly in the forest, you cross the river heads, and that tells you whether you're on this side of the hill or that side of the hill by the way the water's moving, and so you can then find your way back again. And as he decided he wants to go to forest, he doesn't go to very often. He's following the river heads. And as he crosses one of the river heads, he sees a little finger of wild yam floating down the river. And when he sees that, he realizes that only people wash wild yams before they eat them. There must be people up there. So he follows up the river, and as he's walking up the river, he gets closer and he starts hearing this beautiful singing. And he looks through the bushes, and as he looks through the bushes, he sees this spirit swirling, and he sees these gorgeous people dancing around the spirit, and he can hardly contain himself. He has an erection, and he walks straight into this group of these people dancing around the spirit. And when they see him, they look at him and they think, and the older lady grabs him and she makes love to him, and the other women make love to him, and he thinks, this is wonderful, this is amazing. I forgot to tell you that the men actually in their camp back at they masturbate with these hard forest fruit which grow on the sides of trees, and they're like a calabash, so they're sharp and nasty when you make a little hole in them, and they often cut their penises, and inside they're full of this sort of white syrupy stuff that looks remarkably like semen. And so he thinks, these boys, they'll like to get rid of those mapombe, and they're called mapombe. So after, when the women are sleeping, he dashes off and he runs back to where the men are. And he arrives in the sort of early hours of the morning. He says, hey guys, I just found these amazing people. They're called women. They're really great. And they're like, oh, liar, shut up. Go to sleep. What have you been drinking? And he said, no, it's true. And they got loads of honey the day before. He said, look, bring your bomba, your leaf parcel of honey, and let's go and I'll take you to the women. You can see them for yourselves. And so they all traipse off following the old man, and eventually by sort of late morning they've got to the place where the women are, and they're singing again, and he can hear the singing. He says, quick, come along. And they use sign language when they're doing pig hunting, and when you do pig hunting you've got the herd of pigs, so you encircle them secretly, quietly, using bird calls so that you can identify where the other men are. And then when the men are all in position around the herd of pigs, the first man plunges in with his spear, and the pigs start running in every direction. Of course the other hunters are waiting, and they also plunge in their spears, and that way you can kill several pigs. And so the men encircle the dancing women, and then Toli, he charges in with his leaf parcel full of honey, and he sees the old lady that grabbed him first, and he beats her on the head with the honey, and the honey parcel opens like this, and the honey starts falling down her face. All the other women look, and start screaming and start running for their lives into the forest in every direction. Of course the other men are waiting there with their leaf parcels of honey, and bang, they bang them on the head, and the honey breaks open, and the women carry on running, squirming and escaping from the men's clutches. And as they're running, the honey gets to their mouth, and they taste it, and they think, whoa, that's good. Maybe these creatures that are giving us this stuff aren't so bad after all. And so they slow down and allow themselves to get caught. And the men, and they realise, whew, there's something going on here. And very quickly everyone's making love, and they think, gosh, this is wonderful. And the men afterwards, they say, I want 2 of these. No, I want 3. I want 4. And the old lady says, no, 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 1 woman, 1 penis. And and they accept, and they say, okay, it's all right. And they say, look at our mapumbe. We're going to throw away our mapumbe, making it out to be a great loss. And we'll only have you instead, but you've got to give us something. We want that spirit, that ijengi you dance, the little babies come out of. And so the women say, okay, you can have it, it's no problem, we've got other things. And the women interpret their gift of ijengi as a sign of their power, their strength, their ritual, mystical power. And the men interpret it as their strength, their brawn, their force. So those gender work roles still persist today, and the autonomy and independence of men and women's group is constantly reiterated through this connection to this creation myth. And of course, by receiving ijengi, society as we know it today was created. And in the ijengi initiation ritual, that myth is relived symbolically by the whole community, and and in a sense each individual reaffirms their commitment to the social contract that has created society. And their spatial segregation into these different gendered spaces is of course a reflection of that. And honey still remains the principal means by which men show their interest to women. So if you want to show that you're courting a woman, you must bring her honey, regularly give her honey, and eventually she'll understand. And of course it's very dangerous. To climb up this tree to go and get that honey does result in lots of accidents, and men often do get hurt, like Mongimba, he fell out of a tree, that's how he broke his back. And so this creation myth really does influence everyday behaviours in a very profound ways, and it leads and justifies the extraordinary risks that people take in order to fulfil these societal mores. And so you can see, I hope, how your cosmological understandings influence your behaviour and your everyday in a very profound way when you're reliving these epics in your everyday life. And so this brings us to this aspect of cosmology that I really wanted to touch upon today. The women's first husband is the moon. When a woman menstruates, they say she has put the moon in. The husband has taken, the moon has become her husband. She's no longer available to her husband. And this relationship between men and women and the moon is elaborated through the beliefs around Aquila. And what Aquila does in this sense is it anchors cosmological knowledge, gender and political ideology in the core physical and biological processes of human growth and maturation, so that these gendered practices take on an inevitable and natural sort of logic that just seems to be make them seem entirely normal. And it took me about a year and a half to realise that Aquila was significant. And I sat down with a good friend of mine and I asked him about it. And this is what he explained to me. Aquila is the same as Mobeku. That's the name of the medicine god, Komba, sent women, God isn't really the right word, creator, sent women when women put in the moon. The business of Aquila was first with them. It's all about children. You can see women's tummies swell up at this time. It's the wind. They have to expel their wind as Aquila, as blood. This cleans out their wounds. If that Aquila, that blood, stays in the body, it will make the woman ill. She has to get rid of it. If she doesn't do Aquila, then she has to do Aquila. This is how it should be. A women's biggest husband is the moon. If I'm a hunter, I don't sleep around with different women. If I sleep with her and then her and then her and then her, all the animals would know. They would smell my smell and know that hunter has ruined his own Aquila. He's ruined his hunting. Some will come with great anger. Others, I'll shoot at them, but they won't die. And I'll be very surprised. When you shoot at an antelope from close range and it doesn't die, we call this Aquila. So I then ask him, does a good hunter have a strong Aquila? If someone's Aquila is good, they won't say his Aquila is strong. They will just say he hasn't ruined his Aquila. Even a great hunter who sleeps around with women all over the place will ruin his hunting, his Aquila. We call a man who's ruined his hunting with women Matena. Why do you call all this Aquila? Is what I ask. We, Yaka, call all this Aquila because our fathers called it that. This whole business comes from our forebears. Women's blood is one thing, men killing animals is another. Komba made it like this. When women put in the moon, it is Mobeku. Men's Mobeku is just nose bleeding. Men's Aquila is about hunting. The hunter's meat is Aquila, so a hunter needs to eat certain parts of the animal to maintain his Aquila. If someone else eats your hunter's meat, then your hunting is ruined. So Aquila prescriptions result in Mbengele men and women cultivating distinctively different comportments. And these are exemplified by the way they walk in the forest. So because men want to surprise animals as hunters, they walk single file, silently, hardly talking, just whispering, using sign language or bird calls and animal mimicry to communicate with one another. Women, in contrast, walk in large groups with lots of children making loads of noise, and they yodel loudly in order to frighten away the animals, and they don't want to surprise any of these dangerous animals because they're worried about the smell of Aquila that comes from their vaginas. And I was amazed when I asked a woman who I was getting to know well, I said, why don't we go to this part of the forest? And she said, oh no, I don't like that part of the forest, it's frightening, I'm frightened of it, there are too many big animals. I was puzzled why a hunter-gatherer who lives in this forest all her life should be frightened of the forest. And it's precisely because of this smell of Aquila that angers big dangerous animals. And there are about 15,000 hunter-gatherers in 1.3 million hectares, the area of forest where I did my field work. About 0.2 people per square kilometre, which is a healthy carrying capacity for hunter-gatherers. In 2007, the local wildlife conservation organisation estimated the gorilla population of that same area to be around 23,000. So not quite twice as many gorillas as people, but almost. About 9,000 elephants and about 4,500 chimpanzees. And they didn't know how many leopards, but lots of leopards too. Now, these animals are all animals which potentially are dangerous to people. They do attack people. And so women's fear is not unreasonable. There really are lots of dangerous animals that can attack you in the forest. So long as a man has not recently had sex or been sleeping near menstruating or pregnant women, he will not smell of human Aquila, and so will be able to pass without offending the animals. So if you want to go hunting, you shouldn't have sex the night before. One result of this is that women culturally orientate themselves inwards towards other group members. They tend to be more culturally conservative than men. Men, by contrast, represent the group to outsiders. They do battle with these terrifying animals. They go out to the farmers' villages to get goods that aren't available within the forest and bring them back to the camp. So basic beliefs about Aquila and the piecemeal explanations for them differentiate people according to gender and to a lesser extent according to age. And just to briefly explain how that happens, so one of the first things small children notice, and I ask people about how they became aware of Aquila, is when their mother cooks them food but doesn't eat any herself. So children aren't subject, because they're not reproductively active, to the same taboos that reproductively active couples are. And so immediately the counterintuitive way that the child observes mother cooking this delicious food that he's eating and enjoying, but not herself, really makes them think, yeah, something's happening here. And if they hear Aquila being mentioned by adults, they may not pay much attention to it, but they're slowly starting to become aware of it. And then it's in adolescence where really an awareness of Aquila begins in earnest. And for boys, this starts when they start to accompany hunters out into the bush, and as men might discuss why they were attacked by an animal, or why animals are running away from them, or why they missed. They'll be using the concept of Aquila, and the boy will slowly start to become aware of it. When a girl starts menstruating, she is Aquila, and her mother explains how she needs to deal with the blood. There are certain spongy barks that she'll prepare, put them in her cache sex and collect the blood, and at the end of the day she's explicitly told not to throw the bark into water, but to put it carefully into very dense undergrowth, so that there's a particular type of nasty spirit that like that blood more than all other bloods, because it's more potent than other bloods. And they will come and they wish to imbue it through the scent, and scent and smell are very important for people like that, these hunter-gatherers. And because she's so every time she menstruates, she'll follow that practice, and then she of course washes in the river afterwards and so on. But it's only then that she's really starting to become aware of Aquila. And her brothers, who sleep in the same mongulu hut as she does, they will be told not to go hunting. And so suddenly the Aquila of their sister becomes their Aquila too. And they start to realize that why is it? What's happening? And they are asking questions. Why is this all Aquila? And many young men will actually build their own lean-to as a means to avoid having to sleep with their sisters and their mothers, so that they can go hunting whenever they like. And of course, with marriage and reproductive interest, Aquila concerns loom large. And young couples who've just got married will have all sorts of obligations of things that are very common, easily found and desirable foods that they can't eat. And they're always called Aquila, and there's a whole range of these different animals. And the implicit assumption is that people start to become aware of an opposition between animals and killing animals and human reproduction. And it's the high points in human reproduction that are the most offensive to animals. So once you start to learn about Bengele folk biology, and perhaps one of the triggers might be your questions about Aquila to your brother or your father or your mother, and it's often parents that will instruct their children in this, or uncles and aunties. And they'll explain that actually, if you want to be sure, if you're a man, of getting your wife pregnant, you must make love to her while she's menstruating, especially at the end of her menstrual cycle. That's when you're most likely to make her pregnant. And afterwards, you need to make love to her every day, every day, every day. You've got to deposit semen in her womb, because women mystically, mysteriously, amazingly turn all that semen into a baby. And when they give birth, they'll show you this baby afterwards, and they'll say, hey, look, take your child and give him a name, or give her a name. And so when you understand that folk biology, you start to understand why the taboos that you're experiencing. Look, you can't eat blue duiker if you're a young couple. And this is a really common, fast reproducing, easy to hunt animal. You go, meow, 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 and they come running out of the forest to you. It is extraordinary. And they're very delicious. But as a young couple, you can't eat them, because this business of the way they turn their head back when they're running away. And if a woman is pregnant and she eats blue duiker, there's the Aquila of the blue duiker will make her child put his head back, so that when she tries to give birth, he becomes breech. And of course, that's a terribly dangerous situation for a woman to be in when there's no opportunity for cesarean. So once you start to understand these other areas of cosmology, the practices that you're bound to through Aquila start to make sense. And it's that the weirdness of them which is crucial to provoke the curiosity that leads to you discovering these broader cosmological features. And because the knowledge is passed in such a piecemeal way, it never gets expressed as a total body of beliefs that can then be manipulated, changed, and so on. It comes as these little bits and pieces of knowledge that slowly construct a much broader architecture, cosmological architecture. So one of the ways, of course, pregnancy lasting for 9 months, so men don't want to not go hunting for 9 months, nor do their wives not want them to go hunting. So one of the ways around it is you take mongole, which is a red bark. It's the sort of forest equivalent of ochre. And you take some slices on the pregnant woman's belly, you make some slices with a sharp blade, and the blood that comes out from that you mix with the mongole, and then when the husband wants to go hunting, he takes the little ball that he has now with his wife's blood in the mongole and wipes it across his forehead. And it's really important he doesn't touch it, he just has to leave it. And then he goes off hunting, and what happens is that the smell of that little swipe of blood will be sent off to those nasty spirits that have been really waiting for the meals that they get from the menstrual blood of that woman. And as she's become pregnant, as the husband has cheated the moon, and that's one of the expressions we men use for getting a woman pregnant, if he succeeded in cheating the moon, he sorry, where was I going with that? So those spirits will be the ones that cause him problem when he goes hunting. So he's going hunting and he doesn't see any animals or dangerous ones attack him, and it's because they're being put up to it by those nasty spirits who are jealous that he's cheated them from all those tasty meals. And so by allowing that smell to slowly evaporate off his forehead, he appeases those nasty spirits, and they will allow him to go hunting. So there's a sort of a cosmological connecting theme of smell which links up various Aquila practices together. And so those different beliefs actually start to explain a whole series of phenomena. So unlike the northwest coast of Canada, where indigenous hunter-gatherers around there talk about the animals giving themselves up to you, in the Congo Basin, you have to be smart, you have to be wily, you have to be hard to get those animals, because they will try and avoid being caught. So you have to use all your skill and wisdom to get that spear into them, to actually kill them. And it's not easy, it's really hard work. And so the Bengele talk about them as in conflict with animals. It's not a happy relationship. It's one which is perfectly acceptable because that's how the forest as a multi-organism functions, but it's not one which is of animals giving themselves up in some sort of generous way to people. People have to use their guile to catch the animals. So once you start to understand then why those big dangerous animals will charge up against you when you smell of reproduction, when you smell of human Aquila, it starts to make sense to you. And you realize also why those other small little animals will smell it and disappear, so you never encounter them when you're hunting. And so again, Aquila starts to bring in all these other areas of cosmology into a broader understanding for each person as they grow and they move through life. So they pan out to defining which animals you can eat, whether you will hunt as a man or cook forest animals as a woman, whether your style of speech in the forest is loud and song-like or quiet and restrained, and whether you walk alone or in groups. So menstruation is culturally elaborated to become clearly expressed differences between the sexes and a gender ideology that defines appropriate behaviours and activities. And Bengele mostly discuss Aquila in a practical idiom. Breach of rules surrounding Aquila causes specific practical problems like unsuccessful hunting or difficult childbirth. And this gendered experience of Aquila and these associated prescriptions make the gender roles just seem logical because you're avoiding problems. The bodily practices, discipline and behaviour that these Aquila prescriptions demand serve to then justify the key cultural distinctions between what is seen as proper and natural for men and women to do, between obtaining vitality from outside the group versus transforming vitality into new human life within the group. Aquila defines how the body's vital forces, reproductive potential, productive activities and their products, moral and personal qualities and emotions should be shared. And it's through the proper sharing of things that the group will experience good health, unproblematic childbirth and child rearing, and successful hunting and gathering. From their perspective, these are the basic components of a good life. This is how you ensure healthy living. So in this case, social equality is precisely about recognizing difference and celebrating them, combining them together so that they're complementary. And this whole cosmological complex of Aquila is all about showing people the appropriate way to combine these differences. And of course, there's no a priori reason to attribute higher status to human difference. It doesn't mean we're all the same, of course not. That would be destructive to the very process of life. It's our diversity which is our strength, which is our force. So gender equality, like social equality more broadly, is not about sameness. And because of this idea of equality and from maths, the equals sign, we think too much about equality in terms of sameness. It's not about sameness. It's about recognizing that we have differences, but they're equally valuable, and following rules that reflect that equal valuation and that interconnectedness of our joint endeavour in continuing the human lineage, symbolically focus on menstruation across cultures and across ages. And this really is, the anchor. And if those of you who've listened to Chris and Camilla's various talks will hear much more about that, of course, and indeed. Chris and I's work on the origin of language. So the Mbengele experienced the forest as a living being. It's not an object made up of trees and branches as we think of it. It's a sentient multi-organism with all sorts of contradictions within it that come together to produce a beautiful whole. And in order to ensure that it remains a place of abundance where life can can continue healthily, you have to share things properly. And this is gendered, and it's done in relation to how people move through their different ages. By following these rules, the forest will always be experienced as a place of abundance. And there is no word in the Mbengele language for famine, for starvation. That concept, when I told them that people starve to death in certain parts of the world, they looked at me in disbelief. It's like me telling you that in this room somewhere there are people asphyxiating from lack of oxygen. It just is preposterous. It's not a feasible concept. So the Mbengele actually discuss how to maintain this natural state of abundance in terms of Aquila. And I haven't mentioned all the different Aquila practices here, but you're welcome to read a paper I wrote about it where I do try and explain them. Because essentially, and this I think is an important lesson for us today, the only reason you don't experience the forest as abundance, that you might suffer hunger, which is, of course is possible, is because somebody's not sharing properly. And right now in the forest there are all these loggers who've come in and they are hoarding trees, taking them out, not sharing them properly. There are conservationists coming in as a response to try and, we need to protect the forest, it's being destroyed by these loggers. And they come and hoard the animals for themselves, and they stop anybody else from coming in at the point of a gun. And then you had, of course, plantation economies that are increasingly cutting down forests to just put in one type of tree across the whole landscape. And it's this absence of sharing which has turned the forest into an impoverished woodland. It is an absolute tragedy for me to witness when I go back there. And so I think this understanding of abundance as being intricately connected to proper sharing is a fundamental insight that the Mbengele and hunter-gatherers more broadly are telling us. And, and obviously it would be very difficult for us to construct such a system just from scratch like that. But it is remarkable how these different groups of hunter-gatherers have constructed these systems of extraordinary subtlety that have been so amazingly effective for such a long period of time. It really is remarkable. And so what we have here is, rather than having an institution or a teacher telling you how to do it, we have a system of taboos that stimulates curiosity so that each individual makes that mental effort to try and discover that broader cosmology that explains it. And that ensures that each generation understands and discovers, reconstructs, if you like, Mbengele culture for themselves without recourse to any authority figures or institutions. And so learning your cultural practices takes on the quality of personal revelation as opposed to dogmatic instruction. And as a result, Ekila makes sense within its own logic, a logic of smells, of proper sharing. And so it's very difficult to manage by authority because it's largely unexpressed as a uniform body of practices. It condenses meanings and values to establish a cultural store that ensures internal communication between generations without attributing special status to or authority to any individual or institution. It works by hidden persuasion, ontogenetically anchored in inevitable and striking life processes. Menstruation, of course, being the most important of all. Okay, thank you. I think I've just gone up a little bit.